The winter of 1944 brought one of the most brutal seasons Europe had faced in decades. Snow covered the forests, roads, and towns of the Ardennes in thick blankets that swallowed sound and slowed movement to a crawl. German soldiers, pushing forward in what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, marched under gray skies that promised no comfort. They were exhausted. Their supplies were thin. Hunger followed them more persistently than any enemy soldier ever could. Across the lines, American troops endured the same snowfall, the same freezing wind, and the same uncomfortable nights spent in foxholes. But they did so with a very different burden. Their bellies were full. Their basic needs were met. In pockets and backpacks, they carried compact cardboard boxes that held a powerful secret. These were K-Rations, small, efficient, and deceptively ordinary packages that represented something far greater than just a meal. In the chaos of battle, German units occasionally overran American positions, capturing weapons, ammunition, and supplies. Among the spoils were the strange little ration boxes. To German officers accustomed to seeing their own men divide stale bread into smaller portions just to stretch the day's intake, the American rations looked almost luxurious. At first, their reactions were smug. They laughed. They made jokes about the soft Americans and their packed lunches prepared for them like schoolchildren. But that laughter faded the instant they opened those boxes. Inside were items German soldiers rarely saw anymore, not on the front and not even at home. Chocolate bars, canned meat, chewing gum, real coffee, packets of sugar, biscuits that were dense but rich compared to their own tasteless substitutes. Even a small pack of cigarettes often appeared inside. To the half-starved troops of a collapsing empire, Germany was fighting on desperation. America was fighting on abundance. The contrast was not new. For years, the United States had been building a supply system that reached across oceans. Cargo ships, trains, trucks, and aircraft worked together to deliver a constant flow of food to soldiers in every theater of war. Even halfway around the world, an American private could expect a meal that carried a sense of home. Something sweet, something meaty, something that reminded him he was supported by a nation of farms and factories operating at full speed. In comparison, German supply lines had been shrinking and straining under relentless Allied pressure. Bombing campaigns targeted factories, rail hubs, and fuel depots. The best trains were gone. The best horses were gone. Ersatz had become a common word. Ersatz bread. Ersatz coffee. Ersatz life. Food became not just nutrition but evidence. Every meal told a story about who was winning. On the front line, the average German soldier's daily ration had been cut again and again. Portions grew smaller. Substitutes replaced real ingredients. The taste of war was bitter and disappointing. Soldiers often wondered where the real food had gone. The truth was that Germany's ability to produce and transport food had collapsed under the weight of a multi-front war and Allied domination of supply routes. Meanwhile, American soldiers tore open their ration boxes and ate confidently. The cardboard wrapping was sturdy enough to survive drops, rain, and tough handling. The content was scientifically designed to provide energy for long marches, combat stress, and freezing conditions. Even the packaging carried a message. Thought and planning had gone into this. Someone cared about the soldier who would eat it. A strange feeling grew in the minds of those who examined the American rations closely. Each piece of candy, each canned portion, reflected a national capacity that seemed impossible to defeat. How could an army that fought while well-fed ever be stopped by men whose stomachs growled with every step forward? Hunger was a weapon, and the Americans had made sure it pointed only at the enemy. The discovery of K-Rations did more than fill the stomachs of those who captured them. It filled their thoughts with doubt. If America could supply every soldier with real food in the midst of winter, what else could they do? What other forms of abundance powered their war effort? How long could Germany continue on dwindling rations while the enemy enjoyed what felt like a banquet by comparison? Behind every soldier receiving a ration was an enormous industrial engine at full power. American agriculture produced a staggering volume of wheat, meat, vegetables, and dairy products. Factories packaged and preserved foods using new technologies developed specifically for war. Designers created meals that could withstand travel and still provide nutrition weeks or months later. Trucks and ships carried those meals to ports and depots across Europe, and from there to the hands of individual soldiers. This was logistics as a weapon, not as dramatic as a tank or artillery piece, but far more decisive. The German High Command understood the importance of logistics as well, but their situation forced compromises everywhere. Every calorie that reached the front line traveled through a shrinking system, damaged by fuel shortages, Allied bombing, and the sheer geographical pressure of war on too many fronts. Soldiers felt the consequences immediately. Hunger made the Americans faced cold and danger too, but their soldiers carried an invisible advantage. Strength, energy, clear focus. A full stomach made a man feel like tomorrow was possible. For the German soldier, tomorrow meant only more exhaustion. In captured letters, German soldiers wrote home describing their shock at American supplies. Some wondered how a nation could send chocolate across the sea to men already better fed than their own children. Others expressed envy, mixed with anger, that such luxury existed at all during a time when people at home queued for hours just to receive ration bread or potatoes. Every time a German soldier opened an American ration box, it felt like a reminder that the war was slipping away from them, that no matter how brave or determined they were, they could not sustain themselves. A soldier could push past fear or pain, but he could not push past starvation forever. The frontline experience was simple: hunger versus plenty. The broader story was vast: desperation versus industrial power. The K-Ration was originally designed to support mobile troops, paratroopers, and infantry who operated away from field kitchens. Each box represented a single meal: breakfast, dinner, supper. Soldiers would carry multiple boxes, enough for 3 meals a day. The contents changed slightly depending on the meal type, but each one offered variety and morale-boosting treats such as candy or powdered lemonade. German troops who captured these boxes found themselves rationing even the American rations. Instead of eating a whole meal at once, they would divide the contents among several men, just trying to quiet the constant hunger that never left them. A single American ration could provide more satisfaction. The difference in nutrition had consequences that showed up in unexpected ways. American soldiers were healthier. They recovered faster from injuries and illnesses. They marched farther with less fatigue. And they maintained a level of mental sharpness that hunger simply did not allow their opponents to match. Food supported every form of strength a soldier needed. German officers who first mocked the K-Rations eventually treated captured boxes like precious treasure. They learned to respect the power these meals represented. In some cases, they used American rations as rewards for their own men who performed well in dangerous missions. In others, the rations became bargaining chips or morale boosters, sparking small moments of joy in a life otherwise dominated by survival. The winter continued to punish both armies. The wind cut through uniforms like knives. Soldiers huddled together for warmth, hoping morning would bring relief. But with daylight came the same harsh conditions, the same fatigue, the same fights for survival. For German troops, hunger grew stronger with each passing week. For the Americans, food remained a steady companion. Every soldier who opened a ration box became part of a larger truth. War is not only a contest of bullets and bravery. It is a struggle to sustain men long enough for them to fight. Without food, courage fades. Without energy, strategy fails. Without nutrition, even the strongest army crumbles. Germany's soldiers knew the reality of scarcity too well. They had marched through conquered lands believing resources would flow freely. But conquest had become retreat, and retreat had become desperation. Their supply routes shrank as the enemy pressed forward. Every captured crate or ration box brought temporary. The Americans, however, never suffered systemic hunger. Problems arose, delays occurred, but the machine continued to function. Field kitchens distributed hot meals when possible. When not, K-Rations filled the gap. Food was always available somewhere close by, and that consistency was a weapon no frontline commander would ever underestimate. In the Ardennes, where trees groaned under the weight of snow and soldiers stomped their feet to keep blood flowing to their toes, the difference between hunger and strength shaped the outcome of battles. Units with full stomachs could move faster. They could fight longer. They could think more clearly. They could endure. Food influenced everything. The soldiers did not need to understand the full scale of the logistics operations that supported them. They only needed to open a small box and take a bite. The message was clear enough. Someone back home was working tirelessly to make sure that no American would face combat on an empty stomach. The war was far from over, and victory required more battles, more sacrifices, more time. But the discovery of American rations by hungry German troops revealed a simple truth that would only grow more undeniable as the months passed. An army that never starved could not easily be defeated by an army that was already starving. Food and logistics had always played a role in warfare, but World War II pushed the scale beyond anything seen before. Feeding millions of soldiers spread across continents was not simply a task for cooks and quartermasters. It required a national commitment, a transformation in how the United States entered the war with a massive advantage, an economy that had not been shattered by bombing, blockade, or invasion. Its farmland stretched endlessly, producing wheat, corn, and livestock at staggering rates. Its factories rapidly converted from making consumer goods to producing the tools of war, including the machinery to package and preserve enormous quantities of food. This foundation created a food supply chain that could move alongside armies, always ready to support the next advance. During the harsh winter of 1944, many German soldiers could not imagine such abundance existing anywhere. Their homeland was suffering under rationing. Allied bombing had turned industrial centers into ruins overnight. Transport routes were shattered, railways twisted into useless metal. Food that once moved easily from farms to cities now struggled to reach even civilian populations. At the front, the situation was far worse. German rations were originally designed to provide enough calories for hard combat, but those plans had been written during a very different phase of the war. As the conflict dragged on and resources became scarce, the daily ration shrank. Soldiers received dark bread made with fillers like sawdust or ground leaves. Meat became rare. Coffee was replaced with hot water flavored by roasted barley or acorns. The body could live on such substitutes for a time, but never thrive. American soldiers, in contrast, received meals calculated scientifically for nutritional value. Experts studied how the human body responded to physical strain, extreme weather, and combat stress. They considered calorie counts, vitamin levels, and protein needs. They created rations that could keep a soldier alert and strong all day, even under fire. The K-Ration, designed initially for paratroopers and special units, delivered energy quickly. For German soldiers, stumbling upon these rations in captured positions felt like discovering a secret wealth. Every package opened revealed something else to marvel at. Small tin cans that kept food fresh for months. Packets sealed against moisture. Carefully portioned snacks meant to lift morale. Even the labels seemed professionally printed, crisp and clean. It was a stark contrast to the torn, patched wrappings of their own rations. In company command posts and makeshift headquarters, German officers studied these rations with a mixture of fascination and dread. They understood instinctively what this meant. An army that could afford such food was an army that planned to fight for a long time. These were not the supplies of a nation running out of time or hope. These were the resources of a nation just hitting its stride. Even those officers who tried to maintain confidence found their arguments weak against what was in their hands. A soldier may ignore rumors or propaganda, but he could not ignore hunger. And hunger was spreading like disease among the ranks of a supposedly unstoppable force. Food influenced morale more effectively than speeches ever could. When American soldiers ate, they remembered home. They were reminded of the life they had left behind and the promise to return to it. Each meal was a quiet assurance that their nation valued them. Nutrition and psychology worked together to keep spirits high. German soldiers saw the opposite in their own meals. The country they served was failing them. Every thinning slice of bread reinforced the sense of decline. Every empty stomach signaled that the war was slipping out of their control. On bitter nights, American truck convoys pushed through snow-covered roads to deliver supplies to the front. Drivers braved artillery fire and aircraft attacks to ensure that the soldiers ahead of them had what they needed: fuel and the logistics network constantly adapted, moving around broken bridges and damaged roads, reinforcing success wherever troops pushed forward. German convoys attempted the same, but fuel shortages crippled their mobility. Trucks sat idle. Horses collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition. Soldiers sometimes received only a fraction of the food intended for them. Entire units went without proper meals for days. Winter made hunger sharper and more dangerous. Frostbite struck those whose bodies no longer had the strength to resist the cold. Digestion slowed. Thinking grew foggy. A rifle felt heavier when there was nothing in the stomach. Commands became harder to follow. Every human task required more effort. The American Army recognized these dangers and confronted them with planning. When hot meals could not be served due to battle conditions, K-Rations filled the gap. When soldiers rotated off the line for rest, they received hearty field kitchen food and sometimes even luxuries like fresh eggs or fruit, delivered as small reminders that they were not forgotten. German soldiers rotating off the line found little improvement. Supply depots were nearly as strained as the front. Civilians already lived on tight rations. Soldiers sometimes resorted to sending food home rather than receiving it. Their families were hungry too. As the Ardennes offensive continued, more American positions fell temporarily into German hands. And with every captured foxhole or dugout came more K-Rations to be examined, divided, and prized. Each one was a small spark of comfort, but the underlying message remained disturbing. Germany still attempted to maintain the appearance of strength. Commanders insisted that victory was close, that this breakthrough would change everything. But no words could overcome the daily evidence of scarcity. Soldiers might cheer for a new advance, yet immediately afterward their thoughts returned to survival, to their empty stomachs, to the fear that hunger would defeat them before the enemy did. American soldiers, after skirmishes ended, also found German rations. They reacted very differently. Some simply left the food untouched. They were not interested in imitation coffee or bread that crumbled into powdery crumbs. They preferred their own supplies. Others tasted the German food out of curiosity and quickly understood its reputation. The bitterness, the lack of substance, the fatigue it represented all confirmed what intelligence reports had already stated. German troops were suffering. For any army, the act of feeding its soldiers is more than logistics. It is strategy. A well-supplied force can dictate the pace of battle, can choose when and where to attack. It can afford mistakes and recover from them. A starving army can only react. It is always on the brink of collapse, careful not to expend energy it cannot replace. The Americans at the Bulge were temporarily forced into defensive positions, caught off guard by the surprise attack. But within days, reinforced by steady logistics, they regained momentum. Supplies flowed where needed. Soldiers ate without interruption. Energy and strength returned. The line hardened against the German push. For the German army, the initial success of the offensive was costly. Moving forward faster than supplies could follow created dangerous gaps. Troops outran their food. Fuel shortages slowed armored divisions. Hungry soldiers could not sustain rapid advances. The plan depended on capturing Allied supply depots. Every mile gained required more calories than the army could spare. For German soldiers, progress tasted like hunger. Ration bags grew lighter even as the distance from their own depots increased. Snowflakes landed on their tongues, but water did nothing to fill the emptiness that gnawed at them. American soldiers experienced hardship, But hunger was not part of the enemy's advantage. Even when surrounded, units held out knowing that supply drops or relief columns would soon arrive. That confidence translated into resilience. Food gave them the power to endure when circumstances were at their worst. The contrast couldn't be hidden. German soldiers saw American strength daily. Vehicles packed with supplies rolled continuously behind the lines. Even in defensive positions, U.S. troops had extra rations stored close by. German prisoners often expressed disbelief during interrogation. Some could not understand how an army could fight while appearing untouched by deprivation. They had grown up believing that struggle built character, that sacrifice was noble. But after years of war, sacrifice had lost its meaning when results no longer came. The war was teaching a lesson as clear as any battlefield map. Abundance is a weapon, and hunger a weakness. The longer Germany fought, the weaker its soldiers became, not because their hearts failed but because their bodies did. No amount of discipline or loyalty could replace calories. Men collapsed doing simple tasks. They became prone to illness. Disease spread faster through weakened groups. Medics could do little without proper nutrition to support recovery. American medical records showed fewer cases of severe malnutrition. Injuries that might be fatal in a starving soldier became survivable with proper diet and care. Survival rates improved when the body. Every mile gained required more calories than the army could spare. For German soldiers, progress tasted like hunger. Ration bags grew lighter even as the distance from their own depots increased. Snowflakes landed on their tongues, but water did nothing to fill the emptiness that gnawed at them. American soldiers experienced hardship, but hunger was not part of the enemy's advantage. Even when surrounded, units held out knowing that supply drops or relief columns would soon arrive. That confidence translated into resilience. Food gave them the power to endure when circumstances were at their worst. The contrast couldn't be hidden. German soldiers saw American strength daily. Vehicles packed with supplies rolled continuously behind the lines. Even in defensive positions, U.S. troops had extra rations stored close by. German prisoners often expressed disbelief during interrogation. Some could not understand how an army could fight while appearing untouched by deprivation. They had grown up believing that struggle built character, that sacrifice was noble. But after years of war, sacrifice had lost its meaning when results no longer came. The war was teaching a lesson as clear as any battlefield map. Abundance is a weapon, and hunger a weakness. The longer Germany fought, the weaker its soldiers became, not because their hearts failed but because their bodies did. No amount of discipline or loyalty could replace calories. Men collapsed doing simple tasks. They became prone to illness. Disease spread faster through weakened groups. Medics could do little without proper nutrition to support recovery. American medical records showed fewer cases of severe malnutrition. Injuries that might be fatal in a starving soldier became survivable with proper diet and care. Survival rates improved when the body. Beyond the frontline fighting, the support networks for both armies revealed stark differences. American supply depots resembled small cities of organized movement. Forklifts, cranes, and motorized equipment moved crates rapidly. Warehouses stored goods systematically. Teams tracked inventory using clear procedures that ensured nothing was lost. German depots relied heavily on manual labor and had to hide constantly from air attacks. Efficient distribution became nearly impossible. Supplies that did arrive were often a fraction of what was intended. Soldiers received less, and commanders had to make difficult choices about where to send what remained. Food scarcity changed priorities within the German army. Raids targeting Allied supply depots became temptations. Units were sometimes instructed to capture specific resources simply to stay alive. The goal shifted from defeating the enemy to feeding the troops. Every captured American ration reminded them that the enemy did not struggle with such choices. In some cases, German officers attempted to study American supply methods more deeply. They examined packaging materials, preservation techniques, and distribution systems. They recognized innovation when they saw it. But understanding did not grant them the ability to reproduce it. Without fuel and factories, knowledge alone could not generate food. American soldiers sometimes joked that the Germans were fighting on empty stomachs, but behind the humor was a serious military reality. The U.S. Army's consistent rationing program was one of its most effective weapons. It allowed the Allies to push constantly. Every time they advanced, their supply lines followed, carrying heat, nutrition, and comfort into formerly contested areas. Even in victory, German troops often found themselves cold. Winter itself became their greatest enemy. Snow piled high on helmets and rifles. Breath turned into ice crystals that clung to scarves and beards. The cold seeped into bones already weakened from lack of nourishment. American soldiers felt the cold too, but full stomachs warmed the body from the inside. Calories burned like fuel inside them, keeping muscles working and spirits alive. They cursed the weather, but they could still march, fight, and reload their weapons with steady hands. When German soldiers realized that the Americans seemed almost unaffected by hunger, fear crept in. What kind of opponent could thrive in such conditions? How could they be stopped when they moved like men untouched by the hardships of war? The truth was simple. The United States had engineered a war effort built around support. Every soldier, no matter how far from home, remained connected to the power of the nation behind him. Food delivered that message day after day. German troops facing starvation understood a different message. They had been pushed into a battle their country could no longer afford. Every meal reminded them that time was running out. Germany could not win a war fought on an empty stomach. The Battle of the Bulge would be remembered for its intense combat and strategic surprise. But beneath the gunfire and tank battles lay a quieter struggle that shaped the outcome. It was a conflict of production, a contest of nourishment, a test of endurance. In that contest, the Americans were far ahead. The soldiers who carried K-Rations into the Ardennes did not view themselves as symbols of industrial power. They saw the rations as simple meals. They tore open the packaging and ate quickly, eager to continue their tasks. Few realized that each bite was part of a grand strategy. Food sustained movement. German soldiers understood that better than anyone. They felt it in their weakening limbs and fading strength. In the cold forests of Europe, the difference between winning and losing sometimes began with a cardboard box. As December dragged into January, the forests of the Ardennes resembled a frozen graveyard of ambition. The initial German offensive had surged forward with frightening speed, but hunger slowed that momentum. Soldiers who had marched eagerly in the first days now forced one foot in front of the other. Their bodies, drained of strength, demanded food they did not have. During the early hours of the offensive, when German troops first captured American positions, the discovery of K-Rations seemed like a gift from a world untouched by war. But that gift was too small and too rare. No loot could replace a functioning supply chain. No captured box could replace the calories of an entire nation working to feed its army. American soldiers, even when pushed back, still found ways to access their supplies. They dug into their packs and retrieved meals designed to keep them fighting. It didn't matter if artillery thundered nearby or if machine guns crackled through the night. Hunger was never allowed to become the enemy. The contrast between the armies grew more visible each day. German soldiers who had once been celebrated for their discipline and toughness now appeared gaunt and slow. Their once sharp faces hollowed. Their cheeks lost color. They fought with determination, but the strength behind each decision faded with every skipped meal. The American war planners had learned from history that armies fall apart long before their lines collapse if they cannot eat. World War I had taught brutal lessons about starvation and supply shortages. This time, the United States was determined never to repeat the errors that cost lives unnecessarily. Any soldier, whether in a In the early mornings, American squads sometimes heated canned rations when the situation allowed. The sight of steam spiraling into the cold air reminded them that warmth still existed in the world. For German troops across the battle lines, the smell alone was torture. It was a sensory reminder of what they lacked. A reminder that even in the shared misery of winter, not all suffering was equal. German officers recognized how dangerous hunger could be to morale. Soldiers who felt abandoned by their supply system questioned leadership. They wondered why they must sacrifice everything for a cause that could not even feed them. Doubt was contagious. It spread quietly at first, but once rooted in the mind, it grew stronger than any propaganda. American command made sure to prevent such doubts. The message was clear. The United States valued the life and strength of every soldier. Supply lines stretched back to ports filled with crates and barrels, all carefully organized to reach the right units at the right time. Food was not an afterthought. It was a priority that ranked alongside ammunition and weaponry. This dedication to feeding an army required staggering coordination. Ships carried goods across the Atlantic, avoiding submarines and storms. Trains hauled supplies to depots where trucks awaited their loads. Convoys rolled constantly, headlights dimmed, engines rumbling through the icy darkness. The chain never stopped. If one road was cut, another route was found. In contrast, German logistics struggled under relentless pressure. Their trucks often lacked fuel. Their trains faced air attacks. Roads were blocked by wreckage or deep snow that horses struggled to navigate. Even when German units managed to capture Allied, American soldiers joked that their tanks could run longer on chocolate than German panzers could on gasoline. The humor hid a stark truth. Food and fuel were the lifeblood of war. Germany was running out of both. When German troops captured K-Rations, they quickly learned that each box contained far more than nourishment. Carried power in every bite. It restored some small piece of strength that the freezing nights had stolen. German commanders sometimes rationed captured rations across entire platoons, trying desperately to keep their men functioning. A single American meal became a morale booster for many. American prisoners of war also provided first-hand insight. German officers interrogated captured U.S. soldiers and asked about their ration system. The answers only confirmed what the Germans already feared. The United States had built a war machine fueled by agriculture and industry that seemed limitless. American supply officers calculated food needs for months ahead. They planned for shortages before they existed. No unit was forgotten. Where German soldiers most noticed the difference was in the quiet moments between battles. When the sound of gunfire faded and both sides caught their breath, the Americans simply lived better. They shared coffee brewed from real grounds, bitter and familiar. They enjoyed chocolate that gave a momentary escape to childhood memories. They smoked cigarettes without worrying that each one was their last. For German troops, those quiet moments felt heavier. The empty belly spoke loudly in the silence. It gnawed at the mind. The shortage became impossible to ignore. A man might turn inward, thinking not about strategy or duty, but about the next meal that might never come. In letters discovered after the war, German soldiers repeatedly expressed longing not for glory or victory, but for food. They listed cravings: bread with butter, roasted meat, a single American letters home described the opposite. Soldiers sometimes complained that rations were monotonous or not as tasty as home cooking. They joked about canned stew or processed biscuits. Yet even in their complaints there was abundance. A soldier who could afford to be bored with his food was a soldier who had enough. This difference shaped attitudes. Americans went into battle believing they could win. Their bodies supported their confidence. German soldiers fought believing they must win, or else starve. Desperation could spark bravery, but it could not sustain endurance. As the bulge turned against the Germans, hunger began making strategic decisions for them. Some units surrendered not because they lacked ammunition, but because they lacked the strength to continue. Others broke into abandoned buildings searching for anything edible. The line between soldier and survivor blurred. American soldiers witnessing this transformation understood just how deeply hunger had wounded their enemy. They could read the signs clearly. A man too weak to lift his weapon. A shivering figure trying to stay conscious. a once mighty force brought low by the slow, relentless erosion of starvation. The war in Europe approached its climax, and the consequences of industrial warfare became impossible to deny. The United States was not only outproducing Germany in tanks, planes, and ships, it was outproducing them in food, a resource just as essential to survival as ammunition. Historians would later analyze charts and figures showing the staggering imbalance in food production. The United States provided millions of tons of rations each month, while Germany scrambled to replace lost farmland, lost factories, and lost transport networks. But at K-Rations had been designed for convenience, but they became symbols of a larger truth. A truth that German troops learned painfully each day. An army marching on a full stomach will march farther, fight harder, and endure longer. Even when Americans faced shortages in supply, those shortages were temporary and localized. A storm might delay shipments for a day. A destroyed bridge might slow a convoy for a night. But the supplies always arrived. And when they did, they came in massive quantities, restoring the balance instantly. German shortages were not temporary. They were the new reality. The nature of hunger, once established, was merciless. It didn't strike suddenly. Crept in slowly, pulling men down step by step. Soldiers tried to push through it, but every day took more effort than the one before. Those who had once carried heavy equipment without complaint now struggled to lift their rifles. Those who marched confidently now limped. Those who led others now needed help to stand. American command decisions were not just supported by food, they were powered by it. Leaders could take risks knowing their troops had the energy to respond. Orders could be issued with the confidence that soldiers had the stamina to execute them. German leaders made decisions based on hunger, not ambition. Could the troops reach the objective before their strength failed? Could they hold the line long enough for food to arrive? Could they afford to retreat if it meant distancing themselves further from supplies? Every choice was narrowed by necessity. Back home in the United States, citizens supported the war effort with organized rationing, but those sacrifices never came close to the desperation in Germany. American grocery stores still carried variety. Families still gathered for hearty meals. Farmers produced such abundance that surplus food could be shipped across oceans. In Germany, ration cards became symbols of helplessness. Families begged for more food. Children felt hunger that never fully disappeared. By the time supplies reached soldiers, too little remained. The war consumed resources faster than they could be replaced. American propaganda rarely emphasized food as a weapon, but inside military planning rooms, it was well understood. A soldier with enough calories could march through hell. A soldier without them might collapse before reaching the battlefield. The Ardennes proved that lesson again and again. As American forces regrouped and counterattacked, German troops split into two categories: those who had eaten recently and those who had not. The difference in performance between the two was striking. Hunger magnified fear. A starving man hesitated. A starving man sought shelter instead of holding his ground. A starving man surrendered faster. American soldiers noticed that prisoners often asked for food before anything else. Cigarettes were appreciated, but bread meant survival. A steaming cup of real coffee could bring tears to the eyes of men who had not tasted such warmth in months. It became clear that the German army was no longer just fighting the Allies. It was fighting starvation itself, and starvation was winning. The American troops continued eating from their K-Rations, sometimes unaware that every bite represented another nail in the coffin of German hopes. They didn't think of themselves as well-fed warriors supported by a powerful empire. They were just hungry men who happened to have food when they needed it. Yet history would show that the smallest advantages can lead to the greatest outcomes. Food, unseen and uncelebrated in most war stories, played a decisive. As the blizzard winds roared through the Ardennes and artillery thunder shook the ground, the future of the war became clear not in a grand moment, but in the quiet act of eating. One soldier with a full stomach could keep fighting. One soldier without it could not. The German soldiers who opened American ration boxes learned a lesson they could not ignore. They saw the truth inside the packaging. The war was not just being lost on the battlefield. It was being lost in the factories and farms they could no longer match. Hunger was not simply a burden. It was a verdict. The first taste of the K-Ration often came after a firefight. A squad would regroup, inspect what the Americans had dropped or left behind, and find the small green boxes. To German eyes, they looked more like something from a department store than the battlefield. The packaging was clean, labeled, and standardized. Each item had a purpose. Even the accessory packet, which included chewing gum and toilet paper, was a revelation. These were luxuries German soldiers could barely remember, and here they were treated as casual additions to a single meal. Some German soldiers believed the American food was too rich. There were remarks about how the U.S. meals looked pleasant but might not last long in tough conditions. They soon realized how wrong that assumption was. The meals had been engineered to deliver high-caloric energy quickly. When a soldier needed to break through snowdrifts, haul ammunition, or climb forested hills while carrying heavy gear, the energy content mattered more than flavor. The Americans understood this well. Quality control had become an American wartime strength. Factories that once produced consumer goods adapted to ration production. The companies behind these meals also created breakfast cereals, canned soups, and candy bars for civilian life. They already knew how to. While German soldiers often relied on field kitchens that could not always reach the front during combat, American soldiers could eat anywhere, at any time, without falling into starvation. The Germans' reliance on bread and meat posed serious problems during winter campaigns. Bread froze quickly. Meat spoiled without constant preservation. Potatoes, a German staple, became useless when wagons broke down or supply lines were severed. These issues multiplied as the war dragged on. By 1944, Germany was not feeding its soldiers as an organized machine but scrambling to survive the consequences of long, difficult supply routes. American ration distribution considered every logistical scenario. The U.S. Army recognized early that fighting across oceans and continents required food designed for mobility. The packaging alone reflected industrial intelligence. Cardboard was lightweight and disposable. Cans preserved fruit against freezing temperatures. Chocolate was reformulated to withstand heat. Chewing gum prevented dry mouth in cold air and encouraged alertness. Nothing was accidental. Meanwhile, Germany walked deeper into resource scarcity. Even field bakery units, once reliable morale boosters, could not escape rationing policies. Flour was diluted with sawdust or ground root material to stretch supplies. Instead of butter, margarine substitutes spread across slices of dark, thin bread. Soldiers brewed ersatz coffee from roasted acorns. Meals became reminders of supply failure, not sources of strength. The moral effect of consistent nourishment was difficult to quantify, but it showed itself in countless ways. American troops handled long marches with fewer medical complications. When replacements arrived at the front, they were relatively healthy and strong. The U.S. Army could keep its soldiers combat-ready simply by feeding them properly. In the Ardennes, soldiers from both sides struggled with trench foot, frostbite, and exhaustion. But the German condition deteriorated faster. A soldier consuming fewer than 1,500 calories a day in freezing temperatures faced rapid weakness. Some men could barely lift gear. Others collapsed during marches. Commanders attempted to enforce discipline, but the body cannot obey will alone. Energy determines survival. There were also differences in food culture that influenced morale. American kitchens during peacetime had already embraced quick meals, canned goods, and packaged snacks. U.S. soldiers recognized many items in their rations. D-bars resembled home chocolate. Canned pork luncheon meat resembled familiar products from grocery shelves. This connection to home energized them. Even small tastes reminded them of families waiting back in warm houses thousands of miles away. German soldiers experienced the opposite effect. Many foods issued at the front were unfamiliar, stripped of cultural comfort, or intentionally designed to stretch dwindling resources. Ersatz coffee did not smell or taste like home. Bread that crumbled under cold wind offered no memory of family kitchens. Eating became a reminder of loss. When German troops captured American supply trucks or storage depots, they immediately seized rations. Some hoarded them. Others traded them for favors or additional clothing. Officers wrote detailed reports describing the quality and quantity of what they found. These reports traveled up the chain of command and created alarm. Food had become a symbol of power. Thousands of miles away, families back home continued to wait for news. Some received letters filled with hope. Others received telegrams that shattered entire futures. For every soldier marching toward victory, another lay beneath a simple wooden cross somewhere in Europe. On May 7, 1945, the German High Command finally signed the Act of Unconditional Surrender. The next day, across Europe and America, church bells rang again in peace. Crowds flooded the streets. Flags, confetti, laughter, and tears replaced blackouts, ration cards, and air raid sirens. It was a moment the world had earned through 6 years of unimaginable sacrifice. And yet, for the soldiers who had marched from Normandy's beaches to Germany's final strongholds, the victory was not simple. Many stared at the celebrations with mixed emotions. They had survived, but the cost of that survival was written in the faces of the friends they lost. They would carry those memories for the rest of their lives. History would later summarize this monumental conflict in pages and paragraphs. It would be taught in schools, quoted by politicians, debated by scholars. But the truth remained much deeper. World War II was not won solely by generals, strategies, or technological breakthroughs. It was won by ordinary men and women who found courage when the world needed it most. By those who stood firm when fear told them to run. By ordinary soldiers who forced open the gates of tyranny and made room for freedom to breathe again. The war finally ended not with a single shot, but with millions choosing hope over despair. The guns fell silent, the flags were lowered, and humanity, every mile gained by the Allied armies represented a dozen young soldiers who would never return home, and hundreds more who would carry the war inside them long after the guns fell silent. By March 1945, the Rhine River stood as the last significant obstacle. The German High Command expected it to buy time, but unexpected Allied successes destroyed that hope. In Remagen, American troops seized the Ludendorff Bridge intact. That single moment, a freak stroke of luck backed by quick action, opened the gates into the heart of the Reich. It symbolized how improvisation, adaptability, and sheer momentum had become Allied strengths. German units were now crumbling. Fuel shortages turned tanks into useless monuments of steel. The Luftwaffe, once feared, could barely take to the skies. Teenagers and elderly men were conscripted into Volkssturm battalions, forced to defend ruined cities with almost nothing. Many surrendered rather than die for a war already lost. As Allied bombers shattered German infrastructure, and Soviet armies closed in from the east, Berlin became the world's darkest tragedy. Hitler's promises of a 1,000-year empire evaporated into the choking dust of collapsing concrete. Civilians hid in basements, their radios whispering impossible news. The dictator who led them into catastrophe now demanded they sacrifice themselves to delay the inevitable for a few more hours. In early April, U.S. forces advancing in central Germany liberated their first major concentration camps. There were no cheers. No celebration. Only silence and disbelief. Soldiers who thought they had already seen the worst horrors of war discovered new depths of cruelty. Fields filled with starved prisoners. Barracks crowded with the sick, the skeletal, the dying. The truth could no longer be denied. The war had not been just morale fell. Soldiers abandoned equipment to conserve energy. Retreat became inevitable. The difference between planning and hoping became painfully clear. The U.S. ration system evolved throughout the war, learning from mistakes and improving rapidly. Nutrition experts monitored the effects on soldiers and made adjustments. Production facilities adopted better packaging and preservation methods. The system grew stronger every month. German officers who first mocked the small green boxes eventually realized what they represented. They symbolized discipline, foresight, and national capacity. They embodied the idea that the United States had prepared not for a short conflict but for a long struggle that demanded coordination across every level of society. Understanding this forced German leadership to confront the reality that they had underestimated their opponent. They believed the Americans would falter. Instead, they adapted faster and supplied better. The Americans fought with full stomachs, and that strength pushed them through the hardest battles. War continued to rage in the Ardennes, but beneath the gunfire lay a quieter truth. The hunger felt by German soldiers grew sharper each day. The cold pressed harder against their weakened bodies. In the same forests, American troops opened their rations, ate their meals, and continued their mission. The contrast grew impossible to ignore. Food had become a silent ally for the Americans, a powerful weapon no less decisive than artillery. The outcome of the war would not be determined solely by who fired the most shots, but by who still had the strength to pull the trigger. Victory in the West did not arrive suddenly, nor did it resemble the triumphant posters that would later decorate American walls. It emerged through a gradual collapse of German defenses, a relentless pressure. The cold winter weather of the Ardennes amplified every hardship. In extreme cold, the human body burns through calories rapidly. Without enough food, conditions like hypothermia become more likely. Frostbite spreads faster. Reaction time slows. A soldier might struggle just to stay awake during a watch. Hunger made the winter more dangerous than enemy fire. The Americans solved this through consistent, high-energy meals. The K-Ration delivered the necessary fuel to maintain body heat and alertness. It enabled soldiers to fight through the night, push forward at dawn, and defend positions even in blizzard conditions. Warm meals from field kitchens supplemented the packaged rations whenever possible. Hot food revived spirits, reduced cold injuries, and restored strength. German soldiers relied on whatever warm meals their units could provide, but the effort was inconsistent. The chaos of the battle often separated frontline troops from their supply trains. Soldiers resorted to melting snow for water and eating whatever they could scavenge. Sometimes, captured U.S. rations became the only reliable source of calories. These conditions shaped the course of the conflict. When a unit had enough food, its confidence increased. Hunger produced hesitation. In war, hesitation is costly. Even the most experienced units failed when hunger overcame strength. The German command had targeted American supply lines at the start of the Ardennes offensive, hoping to isolate and weaken U.S. forces through starvation. But the logistical network withstood pressure. Repairs were made quickly. Supplies continued to flow. American troops never starved. In contrast, German units carrying out the offensive marched with the hope that victory would lead to captured stockpiles. Their logistics counted on success rather than preparation. When offensives did not, this logistical disparity influenced the broader strategic picture. American advances did not stall from lack of supplies. Reinforcements arrived with equipment and rations. The steady forward movement reflected confidence, planning, and sustained strength. German counterattacks faltered not always from a lack of will but from a lack of energy. Troops who needed food could not execute bold maneuvers. Hunger restrained ambition. German officers recognized that the quality of American rations was not merely a nice benefit. It was a crucial part of maintaining operational capability. A soldier who eats well continues to serve. A soldier who goes hungry becomes a burden on the unit. Hunger slowed artillery crews, weakened patrols, and discouraged offensive action. It turned combatants into survivors. The knowledge that the enemy did not suffer the same weakness generated a mixture of envy and fear. German leaders began to understand that they were losing the logistical war. Their soldiers felt the truth in their stomachs long before official reports acknowledged it. The Americans brought more than weapons. They brought the fuel of human endurance. Even in captured letters from American soldiers, German intelligence analysts observed the impact of reliable food supply. Soldiers wrote about looking forward to meals after long days. They joked about flavors or swapped ration items with friends. These small conversations helped maintain camaraderie. Eating together strengthened relationships. It reminded them that they were part of something larger. German mail often contained expressions of exhaustion and desperation over food conditions. Families at home struggled with rationing. Soldiers worried about the splintering welfare of their loved ones. U.S. soldiers dealt with their own hardships, but hunger rarely joined the list. They complained about specific foods or repeated menus, but they rarely felt weak from starvation. They retained the capacity to march long distances. They maintained their strength under fire. They approached each morning with the energy needed to fight again. The K-Ration, while compact, became a symbol of reliability. Even if a soldier disliked the taste, he trusted the meal to do its job. Breaking open the package reminded him that support was always on the way. The American system behind it delivered more than calories. It delivered certainty. German soldiers who tasted American meals described them later with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Some recalled the sweetness of chocolate melting in a mouth starved of sugar for months. Others remembered chewing gum that made them feel human again instead of cold machinery grinding through the front. The canned meat, the biscuits, the small packets of powdered drinks. Each item contained a different reminder of normal life. In the dark forests and snow-covered roads of the Ardennes, these small reminders carried tremendous emotional weight. They represented a life that the German soldier feared might never return. It was a contrast that cut deeper than any weapon. The Americans were not only better supplied. They were supplied by a society that still enjoyed comfort and confidence. The Germans were supplied by a nation struggling just to survive. Every time a German soldier held a K-Ration to the light of a flickering lantern, he confronted the imbalance of industrial power. The war had begun with Germany pressing outward into Europe. Now it fought merely to maintain ground. The Americans, arriving late to the war, brought with them a different reality. They could afford mistakes. They could afford loss. Warehouses supplied reserves. The system adapted because it was designed to anticipate problems. German supply failures came from a different source. Necessity forced them into improvisation. Trucks lacked spare parts. Roads could not be repaired fast enough. Horses, the backbone of German logistics, died from cold and exhaustion. Railroads served as primary arteries, but Allied bombing raids constantly targeted them, causing delays that rippled across the front. Rations began to reveal a deeper story. The United States possessed agricultural land untouched by war. Fields of grain, vast livestock farms, and industrial food facilities operated at full output. Germany, blockaded from the sea and lacking access to global trade, faced shortages even before the Ardennes began. When American soldiers opened their meal boxes, they saw food from a distant land that felt abundant and secure. When German soldiers opened theirs, they saw evidence of strain. They noticed ingredients replaced with fillers. They tasted food that lacked substance. Even in quiet moments, hunger reminded them that their nation was no longer able to support the fight. As supplies dwindled, German commanders made difficult choices. Some units received adequate rations only by depriving others. Soldiers at the front might eat while those in reserve waited for days with minimal provisions. Medical units struggled to provide nourishment to the wounded. Even elite formations felt the effects. The hunger did not discriminate, touched every rank. The loss of calorie intake produced measurable consequences. Soldiers experienced weight loss, muscle fatigue, and decreased body temperature. Their ability to carry heavy gear diminished. Rifle accuracy decreased as arms shook from weakness. The pace of movement slowed. The captured rations sparked questions that German officers could not easily ignore. They studied the contents carefully, noting not only what was inside but also how it was arranged. Everything seemed intentional, efficient, and systematically produced. This packaging reflected a nation that treated food as a strategic weapon. Each element of the meal spoke to a level of organization and foresight that Germany no longer possessed. Reports from the front described not just the quality of American meals but also their abundance. Prisoners spoke of regular deliveries, large stockpiles, and organized distribution systems that rarely faltered. Letters intercepted from U.S. soldiers revealed ordinary complaints about taste, not quantity. To German officers, the idea that soldiers could criticize their food was almost impossible to grasp. Many of their own men went days without a complete meal. The contrast did not remain hidden. Soldiers talked. Rumors spread. They compared what the enemy enjoyed to what they suffered. Even the most loyal troops could not ignore what they saw with their own eyes. Morale shifted as hunger became a daily companion. Respect for American power grew reluctantly. Their anger and confusion increased at the systems that failed them. The psychological impact of full stomachs versus empty ones was profound. Hunger magnified fear. It made time feel longer, to sharpen the cold. It reduced the ability to think clearly in moments when quick decisions were essential. A starving soldier looked at the battlefield not as a place to win glory but as a place to survive. An American soldier, nourished and confident, could still focus on the mission. Logistical reports within the U.S. Army emphasized the importance of redundancy. Supply lines were not simply created. They were reinforced. If one route failed, another stood ready. Engineers repaired roads under fire. Quartermasters When they tasted American food, they did not simply taste different ingredients. They tasted the reality that their nation's capacity to wage war was reaching its limits. The comparison stripped away illusions. The United States could produce far more, could deliver far more, and it would not stop. Rations became physical evidence that Germany was facing a superior industrial force. The difference between hunger and enough food became the difference between holding a position or retreating into the freezing dark. Victory no longer depended solely on tactics or bravery. It depended on whose soldiers remained standing when the weather and the war both pushed them to the edge of collapse. The Ardennes campaign continued through short days and long nights. Snowstorms buried roads. Visibility faded. Cold froze weapons and skin. Every soldier fought a battle against the environment as much as against the enemy. And every soldier depended on a meal to keep going. In that struggle, the American ration became one of the quiet heroes of the front. It did not look impressive. It did not receive medals. But its presence shaped the endurance of the army that carried it. As German officers evaluated the captured meals, they recognized that the battlefield held two different wars. One was fought with bullets. The other was fought with supply trucks and factories. The Americans excelled at both. Rations told the story of a nation that prepared for a long war. They showed a country able to replace losses, sustain advances, and overcome setbacks. They demonstrated the scale of a power that reached. At night, when the winds cut through threadbare uniforms, German soldiers went to sleep hungry. American soldiers crawled into their foxholes with something warm still in their stomachs. On paper, a single meal might not decide a battle. But repeated across thousands of nights and hundreds of thousands of men, the advantage became undeniable. The ability to feed an army without interruption demonstrated strategic maturity. It revealed an understanding that victory relied on sustaining power. A well-supplied army could continue fighting for months. A hungry army measured endurance not in campaigns but in days. This truth moved quietly through the snow-covered Ardennes. It accompanied every step, every skirmish, every long night of waiting. Hunger weakened Germany from within. Abundance strengthened the United States beyond expectations. The impact of rations was not about luxury. It was about ensuring that a soldier had enough energy to act with purpose. Nourishment maintained discipline, protected morale. It empowered the ordinary infantryman to continue performing extraordinary tasks. As American units held their ground and launched counterattacks, their confidence remained steady. Food assured them that help would always arrive. Even in the coldest moments, they never truly felt abandoned. The warmth of a meal carried a powerful message. Someone was ensuring their survival. That level of assurance did not exist on the other side of the front. German troops faced uncertainty with every passing day. Supplies thinned. Trucks broke down. Horses collapsed in the snow. The logistical structure that once supported swift movements now strained under relentless pressure. Rations declined in both quantity and quality. Soldiers wondered how long they Commanders recognized this advantage. U.S. military leadership studied the consumption rates of troops. They tracked how many calories a unit burned in harsh weather. They adjusted distribution schedules when battle conditions changed. They recognized that logistics was not simply supplying the army. It was helping to shape the battle itself. German commanders did not have this flexibility. When food shortages became severe, there were no reserves to draw upon. The system could not compensate for unexpected demands. Strategic decisions were sometimes made based not on tactical opportunity but on the need for food. Units could not remain in place if they risked starvation. Offensive plans collapsed because supply trucks could not keep pace. Food scarcity dictated strategy. Rations also influenced how soldiers perceived the enemy. German troops saw Americans eating well and concluded they were fighting a wealthy, powerful nation with no intent of stopping. They saw that hunger would never force American surrender. They saw that the United States could outlast them. When war turns into a contest of endurance, the better-fed army often wins. As the battle progressed, stories spread across German lines about the remarkable American rations. Some dismissed the tales as exaggeration. Others believed them completely after first-hand experience. These accounts revealed the fragility of morale when hunger became constant. Soldiers did not just want food. They needed hope. But every box of captured rations reminded them that the enemy possessed both. In the forests of the Ardennes, the outcome of the conflict shifted deeper into logistical warfare. Machine guns and artillery mattered enormously. But behind every shot fired stood the question. To German soldiers, these scraps looked like treasure. They collected the leftovers eagerly. The sight had an emotional impact. The Americans had so much that they did not need to consume every morsel. Nutrition influenced decision-making. Leaders who walked through frozen forest roads needed clear focus. Officers directing artillery required mental sharpness. Hungry troops drifted into confusion. They misjudged distances, forgot orders, and reacted slowly. Hunger chipped away at discipline like ice slowly breaking stone. The longer units remained underfed, the more their physical decline shaped the battlefield. Weapons felt heavier. Ammunition loads seemed unbearable. Movements slowed. Trenches dug into frozen earth became deeper prisons for the body. And in that same winter, American soldiers ate full meals with dessert. That was the quiet victory of logistics. It never fired a weapon, yet it defeated the enemy step by step. The K-Ration was not perfect. Many troops disliked the flavor and grew tired of the monotony. But it gave them the calories they needed. Even when soldiers complained, they continued marching forward with strength. A ration that delivered energy consistently, regardless of taste, still fulfilled its purpose. Every crate of food that reached the Ardennes represented planning done months or even years earlier. Teams of analysts, factory workers, farmers, engineers, and quartermasters created a chain that stretched across continents. Rarely did soldiers think about these unseen contributors. The factories behind these meals remained untouched by war. U.S. manufacturing hubs operated at full capacity with abundant raw materials. Steel mills, canneries, and packaging plants worked non-stop. Nutritional scientists analyzed soldier needs using cutting-edge research. They determined how many calories a rifleman burned in mountain environments or during armored operations. This data transformed into food design. America fed not only its own soldiers but also the armies of its allies. Convoys carried food across the Atlantic to British ports. Canned goods filled storerooms in North Africa. Even Soviet forces benefited from U.S. food shipments through programs like Lend-Lease. The United States became a global supplier of nourishment. Its logistical reach extended across oceans, deserts, and frozen roads. Feeding the world became part of defeating the Axis. German soldiers realized that the food they fought against represented something larger than military convenience. They were facing a country that had mastered production. Every can, every chocolate bar, every pack of cigarettes inside a ration signaled an enemy with resources that seemed limitless. It was a reminder of factories that roared night and day. It was the taste of a war Germany could not win through bravery alone. Sometimes the contrast appeared in moments almost absurdly simple. A German squad, exhausted and starving, would enter a recently abandoned American position. They expected to see signs of strain. Instead, they found small piles of leftover rations. Soldiers remarked that the Americans seemed to eat like civilians on holiday, not warriors in the cold. American soldiers occasionally discarded components they